The morning light on Nexus Prime cast long shadows across the marble floors of the human embassy. Ambassador Keiko Chen stood at the tall windows of her office, watching the strange alien traffic flow through the city streets below. Flying vehicles, shaped like jellyfish, drifted between towering crystal spires. Six-legged creatures walked alongside floating gas clouds that somehow wore clothing. It had been 2 years since humanity made first contact with the galaxy. 2 years since Earth learned they were not alone. The discovery should have been wonderful. Instead, Keiko felt a cold weight in her stomach every morning she woke up on this alien world. The galaxy was not what humans had hoped for. Ambassador Chen. Her assistant, David Park, knocked on the door. His voice carried that careful tone he used when bad news was coming. "They're here." Keiko straightened her jacket and walked to her desk. She had known this day would come. Every species that joined galactic civilization received the same visit, the same demand. She had read the files on 847 other worlds. She knew how this meeting would go. The embassy doors opened with a soft hiss. The creature that entered barely fit through the doorway. High Arbitrator Zexthilla stood 12 feet tall, its body made of living crystal that caught and bent the light in rainbow patterns. Where a human would have a face, Zexthilla had a smooth surface that somehow conveyed ancient wisdom and cold authority. Behind the arbitrator came two smaller beings. One looked like a walking tree with too many eyes. The other resembled a metal spider the size of a large dog. Both carried glowing tablets covered in alien writing. "Ambassador Chen of the human species," Zexthilla spoke without moving any visible mouth. The words appeared directly in Keiko's mind, translated by the neural implant all diplomats received. "I bring greetings from the hegemony of ascendant worlds." "High Arbitrator," Keiko replied, gesturing to the chairs around her meeting table. The furniture had been specially made to accommodate different alien body types. "Please sit." Zexthilla did not sit. Instead, the crystal being moved to the center of the room and began to glow with soft blue light. "I come today to deliver the tribute assessment for the human species. This is a great honor. Your people will join the ranks of civilized worlds under the protection and guidance of the hegemony." The tree creature stepped forward and placed its glowing tablet on Keiko's desk. The spider being did the same. Both tablets immediately began, displaying information in perfect English. Keiko looked down at the numbers and felt her blood turn cold. 3 billion humans, she read aloud, her voice steady despite the shock. "To be relocated to labor facilities throughout hegemony space." "Correct," Zexthilla said. "The human species shows remarkable physical capabilities. Your people will serve well in mining operations, construction projects, and agricultural development. This is an honor few species receive." Keiko continued reading. 60% of Earth's rare earth minerals, including all deposits of lithium, platinum, and thorium, complete geological surveys to be provided within 90 standard days. Your world is rich in resources needed by advanced civilizations, the crystal being explained. The hegemony will ensure these materials are put to proper use for the benefit of all. The final demand made Keiko's hands tremble slightly. Complete transfer of all faster-than-light travel technology, including theoretical research, prototypes, and manufacturing capabilities. "This is perhaps the most important requirement," Zexthilla said, its glow brightening. "Human FTL technology is unique, dangerous in untrained hands. The hegemony must control such weapons to maintain galactic peace." Keiko looked up from the tablets. Around the room, her staff sat in stunned silence. David's face had gone completely white. Dr. Sarah Morrison, the embassy's science advisor, was quietly typing on her personal communicator, probably sending an emergency message to Earth. "This tribute system," Keiko said carefully. "All species pay these costs?" "All species contribute according to their abilities," Zexthilla replied. "Some provide soldiers, others offer technology or raw materials. A few species excel at artistic expression and provide cultural enrichment. Each world gives what it can for the greater good of galactic civilization. And if a species cannot pay?" The crystal being's glow dimmed slightly. "Such situations rarely arise. The hegemony is reasonable. Payment plans can be arranged. Alternative contributions considered. The Enforcement Division assists species that struggle to meet their obligations." The tree creature made a sound like wind through leaves. Keiko's translator interpreted it as polite laughter. "Of course," Zexthilla continued. "Some young species initially struggle to understand their place in galactic society. The Zilani required significant encouragement before accepting their role. The Thorians needed several demonstrations of hegemony resolve. But eventually, all species find their proper place in the natural order. Keiko stood and walked back to her window. Outside, she could see beings from dozens of different worlds going about their daily business. They all looked busy, productive, content. But now that she knew what to look for, she could see other things too. The way certain species always walked with their heads down. How some aliens stepped quickly aside when others approached. The subtle but clear hierarchy in every interaction. "What happens to species that refuse?" she asked. The room fell silent. Even the background hum of the embassy's environmental systems seemed to quiet. "Ambassador Chen," Zexthilla said softly, "in 50,000 years of galactic civilization, no species has ever refused to pay tribute to the hegemony. Such an action would be unthinkable." Keiko turned back to face the arbitrator. "But hypothetically, what would happen?" The crystal being's glow shifted from blue to deep red. "The hegemony maintains the largest fleet in the galaxy for a reason, Ambassador. Peace must be preserved. Order must be maintained. Species that threaten galactic stability cannot be permitted to endanger others." "I see. I am certain you do." Zexthilla's glow returned to blue. "Humanity is a promising species, young, energetic, full of potential. The hegemony looks forward to guiding your people toward their proper role in galactic society." The spider being clicked something that translated as formal time markers. Zexthilla nodded. "You have 30 standard galactic days to arrange initial payments," the arbitrator announced. "The first shipment of human workers should be ready for transport in 45 days. Resource extraction can begin immediately upon your return to Earth. Technology transfers must be complete within 60 days. 30 days, Keiko repeated. "The timeline is generous," Zexthilla assured her. "Most species receive only 20 days for initial tribute preparation. The hegemony recognizes that humanity is still learning galactic customs." The three aliens moved toward the door. At the threshold, Zexthilla paused. "Ambassador Chen, I have observed many species over the centuries. Some adapt quickly to galactic civilization. Others require more time and encouragement. But all eventually find their place. I trust humanity will prove to be among the wiser species." The door closed behind them with a soft sound that seemed terribly final. Keiko stood alone in her office, staring at the glowing tablets on her desk. Around her, the embassy staff began speaking in quiet, urgent voices. Someone was already opening communication channels to Earth. Others were pulling up files on hegemony military capabilities, but Keiko just stood there, looking at the numbers that would destroy her species. 3 billion people, more than a third of Earth's population. Humanity's children, grandparents, brothers and sisters, reduced to a line item in an alien bureaucracy. She thought about her own daughter back on Earth, about her elderly parents, about the billions of humans who had no idea their entire civilization was about to change forever. Outside her window, Nexus Prime continued its daily routine. Aliens went about their business, content in their ordered galaxy. None of them looked up at the human embassy where one woman stood holding the death warrant of human freedom. But they would all remember this day soon enough. The emergency session of the United Earth Council convened 18 hours after Ambassador Chen's transmission reached Earth. Representatives from every nation sat in the great circular chamber beneath Lake Geneva. The room was designed to inspire hope and unity. Today it felt like a tomb. Secretary General Maria Santos stood at the central podium, reading from the glowing tablets that had arrived via diplomatic courier. Her voice carried clearly to every corner of the chamber, but the words themselves seemed impossible to believe. 3 billion human beings, she repeated for the third time. 60% of our planet's mineral wealth, all our faster-than-light technology. The Brazilian delegate raised his hand. "Madam Secretary General, surely there must be room for negotiation. No civilization could seriously expect—" "They do expect it," Santos interrupted. She gestured to the wall screens showing data from the embassy's research division. "We have records of 847 other species that received identical demands. All 847 complied within the given time frame." The chamber erupted in voices. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages. Translators worked frantically to keep up with the flood of outrage, fear, and desperate suggestions. "Order," Santos slammed her gavel repeatedly. "We need order." Slowly the noise died down. Defense Minister General Harrison stood up from his seat. Madam Secretary General, what are our military options? Santos nodded to Admiral Jiang Wei, head of the Space Defense Force. The Admiral's presentation filled the wall screens with tactical data that made several delegates gasp. According to our intelligence from Nexus Prime, Admiral Zhang began, the hegemony controls approximately 40,000 star systems. Their military forces include ship designs we cannot even identify, let alone counter. The smallest hegemony patrol vessel masses more than our largest battleship. The French representative stood. But surely our FTL technology gives us some advantage. The aliens seem particularly interested in our drive systems. Dr. Elizabeth Foster, Earth's chief xenotechnology researcher, stepped to the podium. Our FTL drives are indeed unique. Most galactic species use what they call tunnel drives that require massive energy expenditure and can only jump between specific beacon points. Our drives are more flexible, more efficient, and much harder to detect. So we do have an advantage, the German delegate said hopefully. Dr. Foster shook her head. We have one advantage. The hegemony has 50,000 years of experience, billions of soldiers and weapons that can destroy entire star systems. Our stealth capabilities might help us run and hide, but they won't help us fight. The chamber fell silent. Several delegates stared at their hands. Others looked at the screen showing Earth from orbit, blue and beautiful and impossibly vulnerable. President Martinez of the Americas Federation spoke up. What about diplomacy? Surely we can negotiate some kind of reduced tribute, maybe spread the payments over longer periods. Santos pulled up another file. Ambassador Chen sent us detailed records of similar attempts. The hegemony's standard response to negotiation requests is a 20% increase in tribute demands, plus a reduced timeline. Species that try to negotiate twice lose 40% of their population to administrative penalties. The Indian Prime Minister raised her hand. What about economic warfare? Trade sanctions? Surely we can... They don't need to trade with us, Santos said quietly. They already control the resources of nearly 1,000 worlds. Earth is valuable to them, precisely because we have things they want but don't need. We have nothing they require for survival. For several minutes no one spoke. The weight of humanity's situation pressed down on the chamber like a physical force. Finally, the elderly delegate from Japan stood slowly. In my country's history, he said quietly, we faced impossible choices before. Sometimes the honorable path is not the path that leads to victory. Sometimes we must accept reality and try to minimize suffering. You're suggesting we surrender? General Harrison's voice was sharp. I am suggesting we consider our options realistically, the Japanese delegate replied. 3 billion people is a terrible cost, but it is not all of humanity. 7 billion would survive. Our species would continue. The chamber exploded again. Half the delegates were on their feet shouting, the other half sat in stunned silence. Santos waited for quiet, then activated the central screen. Ambassador Chen's face appeared, transmitted live from Nexus Prime. Ambassador, Santos said, you've been listening to our discussions. What is your assessment of the situation? Chen looked tired. Behind her, the alien cityscape of Nexus Prime sparkled with impossible architecture. I've spent the last 18 hours reviewing every historical precedent I can find. I've consulted with diplomats from other species. I've analyzed hegemony, military capabilities, and political structures. And? The situation is exactly as bad as it appears, Chen said simply. The hegemony has perfected this system over millennia. They know how to break species that resist. They know how to manage populations that comply. Either way, human independence ends in 30 days. The Australian delegate leaned forward. But there must be something, some weakness we can exploit? Chen was quiet for a long moment. There is one thing. But it's not a weakness we can exploit. It's a strength we possess that they don't understand. What do you mean? In all my conversations with alien diplomats, one thing becomes clear. Every species that joined the hegemony did so because they had no choice. But every species also accepted that having no choice was natural, normal, the way things had to be. Santos frowned. I don't understand. The hegemony's power doesn't just come from their military might, Chen explained. It comes from universal acceptance that their system is inevitable. For 50,000 years, every species has looked at hegemony demands and said, we must find a way to comply. None of them ever said, no, Santos finished quietly. Exactly. The chamber was completely silent now. Every delegate stared at the screen showing their ambassador on an alien world, discussing the impossible. Ambassador? Santos said carefully. Are you suggesting we simply refuse to pay tribute? I'm suggesting, Chen replied, that humanity has one option the hegemony has never encountered. We can say no and mean it. General Harrison stood up. That's suicide. You just told us they can destroy our entire civilization. Yes, Chen agreed. They can. But here's what I learned from my research. The hegemony has never actually had to destroy a civilization, not once in 50,000 years, because no one has ever refused. There has to be a reason for that, the British delegate protested. Species aren't stupid. If refusal was possible, someone would have tried it, Chen nodded. You're absolutely right, species aren't stupid. They looked at hegemony power and made rational, logical decisions based on survival and the greater good. They chose the path that saved the most lives and preserved their civilizations. And you think humanity should choose differently? For the first time since the crisis began, Chen smiled. I think humanity is the first species that might be crazy enough to tell the galaxy's most powerful empire to go to hell, and I think that might be exactly what the galaxy needs. The debate that followed lasted 14 hours. Delegates argued passionately for negotiation, for compliance, for resistance, for evacuation. Military experts presented scenario after scenario. Scientists offered increasingly desperate alternatives. But in the end, the vote was surprisingly clear. Santos stood at the podium as dawn broke over Lake Geneva. The chamber was nearly empty. Only a few dozen delegates remained, along with key military and scientific personnel. The others had returned to their nations to prepare for humanity's final decision. The vote is recorded, Santos announced. By a margin of 68%, the United Earth Council authorizes me to deliver humanity's official response to the hegemony tribute demand. She paused and looked around the chamber. These people represented the entire human species. In a few hours their decision would echo across the galaxy. Admiral Zhang, please open all communication channels. I want this message transmitted simultaneously to every hegemony facility, every diplomatic post, and every allied species in the galaxy. The communication officer nodded. Channels open, Madam Secretary General. You are broadcasting to approximately 12,000 worlds. Santos looked directly into the camera. She thought about her grandchildren, about the 3 billion people the hegemony wanted to enslave, about the choice between certain destruction and certain subjugation. To the hegemony of ascendant worlds, she began, her voice steady and clear. Humanity has received your tribute, demands. We have considered your terms carefully. Our response is as follows. She paused. Across the galaxy, beings on thousands of worlds stopped what they were doing and listened. No. The word hung in the air for a moment. Then Santos continued. We will not provide you with our people. We will not surrender our resources. We will not give you our technology. The answer is no, and it will remain no. She looked directly into the camera lens. Humanity chooses freedom, even if that choice kills us all. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, nobody moved. They had just declared war on the galaxy's oldest and most powerful empire. Outside, Earth continued turning. High Arbitrator Zexthilla stood in the center of the council chamber on Nexus Prime, its crystalline body flickering between colors like a broken rainbow. Around the massive circular room, the 11 other members of the hegemony's ruling council waited in various states of shock and outrage. Repeat the message, commanded Supreme Coordinator Vashitar, a being of pure energy contained within a complex geometric field, exactly as received. Zexthilla's glow shifted to deep amber. The human Secretary General transmitted on all frequencies simultaneously. Her exact words were, No. We will not provide you with our people. We will not surrender our resources. We will not give you our technology. The answer is no, and it will remain no. The chamber erupted. 11 ancient civilizations, rulers of the galaxy for 50 millennia, began shouting at once in languages that predated most star systems. Fleet Admiral Korksthan, whose species resembled armored centipedes the size of small buildings, reared up on his hind segments. This is impossible. No species refuses tribute. The system is absolute. Clearly the system has a flaw, hissed Matriarch Senovi, her serpentine form coiled around a floating throne. This human species must be made to understand their position. The youngest member of the council, Trade Executor Pimlon, raised one of his 6 arms. His species looked like walking trees with too many eyes, and all of those eyes now focused on Zexathilla. Perhaps there was a translation error. Human language systems are still being analyzed. There was no error, Zexathilla replied coldly. The humans were perfectly clear. They refuse all tribute obligations. Supreme Coordinator Vashatar pulsed with increasing brightness. In 50,000 years we have brought peace to this galaxy through strength and order. Every species finds its place. Every world contributes to the greater good. This cannot be permitted. The chamber fell silent as the Supreme Coordinator's energy field expanded, casting strange shadows on the walls. When Vashatar spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Fleet Admiral Korksthan. Mobilize the enforcement. Division all fleets, every available warship. The armored centipede clicked his mandibles together in acknowledgement. Shall I prepare standard subjugation protocols, Supreme Coordinator? No. Vashatar's field pulsed brighter. This situation requires a demonstration that will be remembered for another 50,000 years. Prepare total extinction protocols. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Even by hegemony standards, species extinction was rare. It had been used only 3 times in recorded history, and each time the mere threat had been enough to bring entire sectors into compliance. Supreme Coordinator, Matriarch Senovi said carefully, total extinction of the human species might cause concerns among other tribute worlds. Some might interpret such action as excessive. Some might interpret human refusal as permission to refuse. Vashatar replied sharply. Which outcome poses the greater threat to galactic stability? The chamber was quiet. They all knew the answer. Fleet Admiral Korksthan began issuing orders through his neural implants. Across hegemony space, massive warships began changing course toward Earth. The Catherian dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon. The Vorthan battlespheres with their reality-warping weapons. The dreaded Nexari world killers, ships designed for the sole purpose of cracking planets like eggs. But as the fleet orders spread through hegemony space, something unexpected began happening on the tribute worlds. On Zelios Prime, in the deep mining tunnels where Zelani workers had labored for 30,000 years, the foreman noticed that production had slowed. When he investigated, he found workers gathered around communication screens, watching a single transmission over and over again. A human woman standing at a podium, speaking one simple word. No. Get back to work, the foreman shouted, his translator, making the Zelani workers understand. This has nothing to do with you. But the workers didn't move. An old Zelani female, her carapace scarred by decades of mining equipment, looked up at the foreman. Someone finally said no, she whispered. On Thorian mining colonies scattered across 100 worlds, human crews worked alongside other enslaved species. The humans had been there for over a century, descendants of Earth's first generation of space colonists who had been captured during the early expansion. They had never seen Earth. They barely remembered human culture. But when the transmission reached them, something awakened. In mining shafts and processing plants, on agricultural worlds and construction sites, humans stopped working and looked up at the screens. That's us, one of them said wonderingly. That's our home world. They said no, another whispered. Our people said no to the hegemony. Word spread through the underground networks that connected oppressed workers across hegemony space. The message passed through slave quarters and work camps, translated into hundreds of languages, but always carrying the same meaning. The humans said no. Back on Nexus Prime, emergency reports flooded into Hegemony Command. Production was down, across 50 systems. Tribute species were asking questions they had never asked before. Some were requesting to speak with their planetary governors about renegotiating terms. High Arbitrator Zexathilla received the reports with growing alarm. Supreme Coordinator, we have a situation developing across multiple sectors. Explain. The human refusal has sparked curiosity among tribute species. Some are suggesting their own tribute obligations might be subject to negotiation. Vashatar's energy field flared violently. Impossible. The tribute system is absolute. These species know the consequences of resistance. Yes, Supreme Coordinator, but apparently they did not know that refusal was possible. The terrible truth settled over the council chamber like a suffocating blanket. For 50,000 years, the hegemony had ruled not just through military might, but through the universal acceptance that resistance was impossible. Every species that encountered them had looked at hegemony power and concluded that submission was the only rational choice. Humanity's simple refusal had shattered that assumption. Fleet Admiral Corksthan's mandibles clicked nervously. The enforcement. Fleet will reach Earth in 12 standard days. Should I accelerate the timeline? No, Bashatar decided. Let the galaxy watch. Let every tribute world see what happens to species that refuse the natural order. But even as the words left him, the Supreme Coordinator felt something he had not experienced in millennia. Uncertainty. On Earth, humanity prepared for the end of the world. Cities began evacuation procedures. The Space Defense Force moved every available ship to defensive positions around the solar system. Scientists worked frantically on weapons that might damage hegemony vessels. None of it would matter. Everyone knew that. But they were doing it anyway. Ambassador Chen stood in her office on Nexus Prime watching the alien city below. The streets were busier than usual. More security forces. More official vehicles. The hegemony was scared, she realized. For the first time in 50,000 years, they were genuinely frightened. Her communication system chimed. Messages were pouring in from across the galaxy. Some were from human colonies pledging support they couldn't provide. Others were from alien species expressing confusion, curiosity, and in a few cases, something that might have been admiration. One message caught her attention. It was from a Zalani work crew on a mining world in the Outer Rim. The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear. To the humans who said no, you have given us something we forgot we had. Hope. We do not know if you will survive what comes next. But because of you, we remember that chains can be broken. Chen stared at the message for a long time. Outside her window, hegemony security forces patrolled the streets in greater numbers. The sky filled with more ships than she had ever seen. Humanity was about to die. But maybe, just maybe, they had started something bigger than death. On 1,000 worlds, in mines and factories and work camps, beings who had forgotten the meaning of freedom began to remember. The word spread in whispers in secret meetings and coded transmissions. No, such a simple word, such a powerful idea. The galaxy had said yes to the hegemony for 50,000 years. Now, finally, someone had shown them there was another option. The enforcement fleet continued its journey toward Earth, carrying weapons that could end human civilization in moments. But behind them, across hegemony space, something new was stirring. Resistance. Real, organized, determined resistance. The humans had said no. And for the first time in galactic history, they would not face the consequences alone. The first sign that humanity had been preparing for this moment came when the hegemony's advanced scouts entered the Sol system and found it empty. Fleet Admiral Corkston studied the tactical displays from his command ship. The massive dreadnought, Eternal Order. His sensors showed planets where they should be, asteroid belts in proper positions, but no trace of human civilization. Where are their defenses? He clicked to his tactical officer. Unknown, Fleet Admiral. We're detecting no military vessels, no orbital installations, no defensive platforms around any planet. Corkstan's mandibles twitched with irritation. They cannot have evacuated 7 billion beings. Scan for life signs. The tactical officer worked at his controls for several minutes. Fleet Admiral, I'm reading. This cannot be correct. Report. I'm reading normal life signs on Earth. Cities appear occupied, but I'm also reading those same life signatures on Mars, on Europa, on 17 different moons, and on what appear to be mobile installations throughout the system. Impossible. Humans do not possess matter transportation technology. No, sir, but they appear to possess something else. The tactical officer's voice carried a note of confusion. Fleet Admiral, I'm detecting over 40,000 individual faster-than-light signatures. Corks then reared up on his hind segments. 40,000 ships? Our intelligence indicated humans possessed perhaps 200 FTL vessels. These signatures are different, smaller, much smaller. Some appear to be individual fighters or shuttles, but they're all FTL capable. Before Corkston could respond, his communication officer announced incoming transmissions on all frequencies. The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of a human female in military uniform. This is Admiral Chen of the Earth Defense Force, the woman announced. You are entering sovereign human space. Withdraw immediately. Corkston activated his own transmitters. I am Fleet Admiral Corksthon of the Hegemony Enforcement Division. You will surrender immediately and prepare to receive occupation forces. Admiral Chen smiled, and something about that expression made Corksthon's armored hide prickle with unease. Admiral, she said pleasantly, you're about to learn why humanity said no. The human ships appeared from everywhere at once. They materialized, out of FTL directly beside hegemony vessels. They dropped out of warp inside asteroid fields and behind moons. They came up from planetary atmospheres and down from the outer system. 40,000 small, fast, impossibly agile ships that moved like nothing the hegemony had ever seen. Evasive maneuvers, Corksthon ordered, but it was too late. The human ships didn't attack with conventional weapons. Instead, they began broadcasting. Every communication channel in hegemony space suddenly filled with voices. Thousands of voices speaking hundreds of languages, but all saying the same thing. This is the human resistance. To all enslaved species, all tribute worlds, all peoples under hegemony rule. Today we fight for freedom. Today you can choose. The broadcasts weren't just going to the hegemony fleet. They were being transmitted across the galaxy through a network the hegemony had never detected. Hidden relay stations activated on distant worlds. Sleeper agents revealed themselves. Species that had seemed loyal for millennia suddenly began coordinating on secure channels. On Zelios Prime, 30,000 years of suppressed rage finally found its voice. Zelani workers seized mining equipment and turned it into weapons. They overwhelmed their overseers in minutes and began broadcasting their own messages of rebellion. On Thorian colonies, human descendants who had never seen Earth fought alongside beings who had never known freedom. Agricultural worlds became battlefields. Processing plants became fortresses. On Nexus Prime itself, the carefully maintained peace shattered as riots broke out in the alien districts. Species that had never spoken to each other united against their common oppressors. Fleet Admiral Corksthon watched his tactical displays in growing horror as red warning lights appeared across hundreds of star systems. Half the galaxy was in revolt, and it had happened in less than an hour. How is this possible? He demanded. Our intelligence networks detected no resistance organizations. Because we weren't looking for humans, Admiral Chen's voice replied, through his communication system. Somehow the humans had hacked into his secured channels. We were looking for aliens who might rebel. We never imagined humans could organize a galaxy-wide resistance network. The truth was staggering in its simplicity. For decades, humans had been captured and enslaved across hegemony space. But unlike other species, humans had never accepted their situation. They had organized, they had planned, they had waited. Human engineers had worked in hegemony shipyards and learned every detail of alien technology. Human miners had mapped the internal structures of fortress worlds. Human agricultural workers had identified the exact food supplies that sustained hegemony military bases. And human diplomats, scattered across the galaxy in various capacities, had quietly made contact with every oppressed species they could find. You see, Admiral Chen continued, her voice now reaching every ship in the hegemony fleet, humans have one advantage you never considered. We're really, really good at holding grudges, and we never, ever give up. The space battle that followed would be remembered as the most chaotic engagement in galactic history. The hegemony fleet was vastly superior in raw firepower, but the human ships fought like nothing anyone had ever seen. They used their superior FTL systems to jump in and out of combat at will. They coordinated with rebel forces on nearby planets to create crossfire situations. Most importantly, they broadcast everything live across the galaxy, showing every oppressed being that the supposedly invincible hegemony could bleed. But the real shock came when hegemony ships tried to retreat to their fortress worlds and found them already under attack. The human resistance network had been planning this moment for generations. They knew exactly which facilities to hit, which supply lines to cut, which commanders to target. More importantly, they had spent decades earning the trust of species that had been too afraid to resist. Now those species had hope. And hopeful beings fight harder than desperate ones. On Earth, Secretary General Santos watched the battle reports with a mixture of pride and terror. The plan was working, but at a terrible cost. Entire human colonies were being destroyed in retaliation. Billions of beings across the galaxy were dying in the uprising. Madam Secretary General, her military aide reported, we're receiving surrender offers from 3 hegemony sector commanders. They're requesting terms. Santos looked at the tactical displays showing combat across 1,000 star systems. What kind of terms? They want to negotiate reduced tribute payments in exchange for ceasefire. Santos was quiet for a long moment. Then she activated the communication system that connected her to every human ship, every resistance cell, every rebel group across the galaxy. "This is Secretary General Santos of Earth," she announced. "The hegemony is requesting negotiations. Our response remains the same as it has been from the beginning." She paused, thinking about the 3 billion people the hegemony had wanted to enslave, about the thousands of human colonies that had suffered under alien rule, about the species across the galaxy that had lived in bondage for millennia. "No," she said simply. "No negotiations, no compromise, no tribute. The only acceptable outcome is the complete end of the hegemony system. Freedom for every world, every species, every being." The fighting continued, but something had fundamentally changed in the galaxy. The hegemony's power had always depended on the belief that resistance was impossible. That belief was gone forever. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had lived their entire lives as slaves looked up at the sky and saw hegemony ships being destroyed by rebels. They saw species they had never heard of fighting for their freedom. And they joined the fight. The human word "no" had become a battle cry. But more than that, it had become proof that even the most powerful empire could be challenged. The galaxy would never be the same. The siege of Nexus Prime lasted 47 days. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the human victory, watching the ancient fortress world through the view screen. The planet that had served as the hegemony's capital for 50,000 years now burned with the fires of revolution. Rebel ships from 300 different species surrounded the world in a massive blockade. "Admiral," her tactical officer reported, "we're receiving another surrender offer from the Council." Chen nodded. "Put them through." The screen flickered, showing High Arbitrator Zexithilla in what appeared to be an emergency bunker. The crystal being's usual rainbow glow had dimmed to a weak amber. Behind it, the other council members huddled in obvious defeat. "Admiral Chen," Zexithilla said, its mental voice carrying exhaustion, "the council is prepared to discuss terms." "I'm listening. We propose a 50% reduction in tribute obligations across all systems, elimination of forced population transfers, greater autonomy for tribute worlds." Chen looked at the being who had threatened her entire species just months ago. "No. 75% reduction, complete elimination of population transfers, full self-governance for all worlds." "No." Zexthilla's glow flickered desperately. "We are willing to eliminate tribute obligations entirely. The hegemony will function solely through voluntary trade agreements and mutual defense pacts." "No." The crystal being was silent for a long moment. "What do you want?" Chen leaned forward in her captain's chair. "The complete dissolution of the hegemony, full independence for every world, reparations for enslaved populations, and trials for every council member who participated in the tribute system." "That is not negotiation," Zexthilla protested. "That is unconditional surrender." "Yes," Chen agreed. "It is." The transmission ended. On the view screen, Nexus Prime continued to burn. The final battle began at dawn. Nexus Prime time. The combined rebel fleet, now numbering over 200,000 ships, moved against the planet's ancient defenses. But the real assault came from within. Across the planet's surface, enslaved beings who had served the hegemony for millennia rose up against their masters. Zilani workers seized the spaceports. Thorian miners collapsed the tunnel systems that connected government districts. Human descendants who had worked as servants in the council chambers opened sealed doors for rebel infiltrators. The fighting was brief, but decisive. After 50,000 years of unchallenged rule, the hegemony had forgotten how to fight a determined enemy. Their forces were designed to intimidate and overwhelm primitive civilizations, not to face coordinated resistance from hundreds of species working together. By sunset, Nexus Prime time, it was over. Chen walked through the halls of the council chamber, her boots echoing in spaces that had seen the decisions of a galactic empire. The circular room where the 12 had ruled now stood empty except for rebel soldiers and the scattered remains of alien technology. "Admiral," one of her officers called out, "we found them." The surviving council members sat in detention cells that had once held political prisoners from 1,000 worlds. Now the tables had turned. Zexthilla looked up as Chen approached, its crystal body almost completely dark. "The irony is not lost on us," the former High Arbitrator said quietly. "We who ruled through force are now held by force." "The difference," Chen replied, "is that you will receive fair trials. Your victims never did." "What happens now?" Zexthilla asked. You have destroyed the oldest government in galactic history. Who will maintain order? Who will prevent wars between species? Who will regulate trade and communication? Chen smiled. The beings you enslaved for 50,000 years. Turns out they're pretty capable when you're not crushing their spirits. And they were. Within months of the hegemony's fall, the Galactic Cooperative formed from the ashes of the old empire. Unlike the hegemony, membership was voluntary. Unlike the tribute system, trade was fair and mutually beneficial. The humans, despite their role in the revolution, refused to take a leadership position. Instead, they became facilitators, using their resistance networks to help species communicate and coordinate. The human gift for organization and their stubborn refusal to accept injustice made them natural mediators. Some worlds chose isolation after millennia of forced integration. Others formed new alliances based on common interests rather than shared oppression. A few species even chose to maintain some version of their old tribute relationships, but now as voluntary partnerships. The galaxy was messier than it had been under hegemony rule. There were disputes, conflicts, and inefficiencies. But there was also something that hadn't existed for 50,000 years: genuine freedom. Chen retired from active military service and returned to diplomatic work, helping establish the new galactic government. But her real satisfaction came from smaller moments, like the message she received from Zelios Prime, where former mining slaves had built the galaxy's first memorial to enslaved beings. The inscription, translated into every known language, read simply, "They told us resistance was impossible. Humanity proved them wrong." Or the delegation of young beings from dozens of species who visited Earth to study at the newly established University of Galactic Freedom. They came to learn about the species that had said no to an empire and meant it, or the moment, 5 years after the revolution, when she stood before the Galactic Cooperative Assembly to deliver the annual memorial address. Representatives from 800 different worlds filled the Great Chamber, species that had never been allowed to speak now, debating freely about their common future. 5 years ago, Chen began, humanity received a demand that we could not accept. We were told to surrender our people, our resources, our freedom. We were told that compliance was inevitable, that resistance was impossible, that the natural order of the galaxy required our submission. The chamber was completely silent. Even the translator system seemed to pause in respectful attention. Our response was simple, Chen continued. One word that changed everything. Not a speech, not a declaration, not a manifesto. Just no. She looked around the chamber, seeing beings whose ancestors had forgotten what freedom looked like. Today, I want to remind you that this word belongs to all of us. When someone tells you that injustice is natural, you can say no. When someone claims that oppression is inevitable, you can say no. When someone insists that the strong must rule the weak, you can say no. The applause began slowly with the human delegation. Then the Zilani representatives joined in. The Thorians, the former mining colonies. Within moments, the entire chamber was on its feet, 800 different species united in celebration of the simple power of refusal. But, Chen continued, when the noise died down, remember that saying no is only the beginning. What matters is what you build after you refuse to accept the unacceptable. Years later, when historians tried to explain how one word had toppled the galaxy's oldest empire, they pointed to complex factors: the hidden resistance networks, the coordination between species, the military strategies and technological advantages. All of those things mattered. But the real explanation was simpler. For 50,000 years, every species that encountered the hegemony had looked at their power and concluded that resistance was impossible. They made rational, logical decisions based on survival and the greater good. They chose the path that saved the most lives in the short term. Humanity looked at the same situation and came to a different conclusion. Maybe resistance was impossible. Maybe they would all die. But some things were worth dying for, and freedom was one of them. The galaxy had spent millennia asking, how can we survive? Humanity asked a different question. How should we live? That difference in perspective changed everything. In the end, the galaxy didn't reel because humanity was stronger than the hegemony. It reeled because humanity proved that strength was not the only power that mattered. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to accept the world as it is. Sometimes the most powerful response to overwhelming force is a single word: no.